Chapter 9 Blueprint for Immortality, Part 1. The way you see people is the way you treat them, and the way you treat them is what they become. End quote. Johann von Goethe. The title of this book absolutely suggests that the human genome has every building block and potential to maintain its existence throughout eternity. By examining how the universe works to its most minute detail, we continue to observe that its nature does seem infinite. In reference with our entire essence, since we are connected to this infinite consciousness, when we examine the ramifications of the nature of infinity, then such data easily help us to conclude what kind of existence our lives must become. Although Napoleon Hill never discussed the aspects of the possibility of eternal life, he did emphasize the desire to see our world united in peace and security. Napoleon Hill has been an outstanding source of information who continues to create indescribable success in those who decide to take on his lessons and integrate them into their personal lives. So much so was the case, he describes in Chapter 12 of his original work entitled The Law of Success, an interesting action plan for ramifications and stipulations, a blueprint, if you will, of exactly what needs to occur in order for such scenario to play out in our world. But why should we even consider Napoleon Hill's plan for world peace? We should consider that Napoleon Hill has been one of the most avid students of natural law and success philosophy as they relate to mankind's consciousness and the power of our essence. So just like this book, his famous works such as The Law of Success and Think and Grow Rich emphasize that the principles contained therein are solely based on laws of physics and not opinions or plain guesswork. So just like scientists depend on mathematicians to discover and reaffirm theoretical laws of physics, so do we depend on proven principles of life for us to have integrated ability to understand such laws as we learn to live by them and learn how to apply them in our lives to create desired results. We can say that, in essence, we are doing our best to become masters of natural law. We must study and pass the bar exam based on the laws of the universe to graduate and become proficient at interpreting such laws. We owe it to ourselves and our loved ones. Can we see why and how Nikola Tesla, as a master student of natural law, was able to conceive the idea of a future society where people have discovered the secret to immortality, youth, and beauty? His shining example as a master student and interpreter of the laws of the universe has allowed us to experience life faster and better. He has given us one of the more expensive and valuable resources known to mankind: time. Every conceivable technology came to be thanks to his ingenuity. Not that he must be attributed credit for every piece of tech, but that his influence and knowledge has touched the lives of those who have originated probably every piece of technology we know about today. So just like an integration is built upon another, we are now experiencing technology that is mind-blowing due to Tesla's first integrations of scientific knowledge. The opening quote in this chapter gives light to a powerful insight in relationships and the laws of physics and how they must be applied when we come in contact with other human beings. Since the way we relate to people is influenced powerfully by our preconceived ideas, whether we develop them through social heredity or our DNA bloodline, our perceptive powers may be distorted to the laws of physics. Thus, some drastic changes must take place at the root of people's lives. Napoleon Hill made many comments that align with the universal principles that must be implemented, like the way a surgeon must apply emergency medical procedures to maintain the life of a terminal patient. This does not mean we must agree with every word he ever said or wrote, but that we should also use discernment and find practical applications. As such is the case, We can also consider successful examples of those who have applied these principles to create relative peace and security among the populace. Is there such an example? Absolutely. But before we mention this seemingly insignificant group of people who have achieved tremendous success in relation to world peace, let's discuss what exactly must begin to happen within the populace to get the ball rolling on this fantastic idea. There has got to be a predominant shift in people's minds at the core of their very beings and replicate and permeate the ether with its blueprint transmission. Thus, like stacked dominoes, one will continue to knock against the other progressively to reach the final outcome. Therefore, each successive event must take place before the next event occurs. The first key to the door to immortality. Quote, I wipe the slate of what I believe to be my previously gathered knowledge, and to unlearn much that I had previously believed to be truth. End quote, by Napoleon Hill. It is obvious here that Hill came to some serious discoveries about his thinking. He realized that just like completely reformatting or resetting the drive of a computer, he had to remove all corrupt data that did not align with the positive consequences of the practical application of universal law for the betterment of his personal life. For example, a person who believes is superior to others for whatever reason may form a habit of looking down on those who may not have achieved their personal success. An extreme negative example may be that of Nazi Germany. Their feelings of superiority did not influence them to give of themselves to improve their society and other people's lives, but instead they decided to remove from existence those people they deem unworthy through obscene, gross, and immoral actions. Their pride and ego devastated the lives of millions of people's well-being and happiness through a horrendous world war. The world still feeling the consequences of those past actions. What if they would have decided to implement all those resources and their mental canon to creating technologies to improve the world, exercising the golden rule? Could they have learned how to eradicate illness and disease at least to a certain extent? Could they have learned and implemented educational systems in the world that would have propelled their most common people to incredible success? And instead of subverting other nations' sovereignties through war and invasion, could they have invaded other countries with positive education and technological advancements throughout the world? How will have the law of attraction help repay such giving once those services were rendered throughout the world? It would be wise to scrutinize our mental patterns, behaviors, and beliefs to see whether they are creating in us positive and loving habits. What if the most foundational principles of belief of every individual were to govern the mind of the populace in such a way that at every moment of the day we would ask ourselves, how may I be of service to others? If we were to see others under the light of how we can produce value for them, what kind of person would they become? What was the result of Napoleon Hill's personal application of these laws and how they shed light to the nature of his most prevalent beliefs? Quote, I found most of my views on these subjects without support by even a reasonable hypothesis, much less sound facts or reason, end quote, by Napoleon Hill. The foundational laws of immortality. Are there really such laws or principles that we can live with to eventually achieve biological immortality? Yes, for by understanding the most basic laws or principles that govern the physical universe, such knowledge will help us to know and give us the discernment as to what must be our most prevalent thoughts. Once we perpetuate this knowledge through our very being, one person at a time, then we will have no choice but to get there. Let's consider strongly the following foundational principles of life. Foundational law of immortality, number 1. Quote, we must love God with your whole heart and with your whole soul and with your whole mind, end quote. Foundational law of immortality, number 2. Quote, we We must love our neighbor as ourselves. End quote. This is not religious dogma or biased stubbornness based on religious lies. These are the most foundational building blocks of life as they stand to create the most wonderful life we could possibly acquire. Nikola Tesla emphasized that his driving force was, in essence, these principles. Let's consider this thought carefully for a second. He said, quote, "The desire that guides me in all I do is the desire to harness the forces of nature to the service of mankind." End quote. Here we see the driving force behind all his success, which is founded on the foundational laws for immortality. He was able to harness the forces of nature to create. Thus, we see the physical manifestations of his creations till today. But how specifically was he able to harness such forces into practical value? The following quote may shed light on the conclusion. Quote, "The gift of mental power comes from God, divine being, and if we concentrate our minds on that truth, we become in tune with that great power." End quote, by Nikola Tesla. The key is to be in tune or to match and resonate with the frequency of the power of God and the universe. How? We must exercise love for God and those who reflect His power, those who are made in His image. Well, how can we show love for God? Quote, "For this is what the love of God means, that we observe His commandments, and yet His commandments are not burdensome." End quote. 1 John chapter 5, verse 3. Interestingly enough, the scripture reference emphasizes that we show love for God by observing and living by statuses or decrees based on laws of the universe. As stated before, since we learn about God through creation, then our behavior must conform and resonate or must match the frequency of vibration of those energetic laws of the universe. We must tune in, as suggested by Tesla, by concentrating or focusing intensely our powers of perception to those truths. They are all physical laws based on love. But then the question arises, what is love? Napoleon Hill referred to it, quoting Jesus, as the golden rule. We all know, or at least are familiar of the concept that we must do to others in the same way we want others to do for us. Nikola Tesla had love for others since he stated that he wanted to service mankind. He loved neighbor as himself. Thus he fulfilled the universal laws of immortality. We must, as individuals, create and transform our entire mentality to align with the golden rule, to match the energetic blueprint of love. We must examine carefully, like Mr. Hill, to bring into submission every thought and belief we may have and test them to see if they are fireproof. In essence, do they align with and match the same resonance of the love for God and love for self and neighbor? This places the moral obligation on us to ask ourselves about our personal philosophies of life, where they came from and where we got them. And if they do not align with these building blocks of life, the foundational laws of immortality must suppress that which does not support them. Love then will destroy or burn up any agreements or man-made preconceived notions that do not perfectly align with these principles. Quote, "If our law is unjust, a man is not only right to disobey it, he is obligated to do so." End quote, by Thomas Jefferson. Quote, "A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God." End quote, by Martin Luther King. Quote, "Any law which violates the inalienable rights of man is essentially unjust and tyrannical. It is not the law at all." End quote, Maximilien Robespierre. The essence of the golden rule is applying and exercising our inalienable rights without taking away or overstepping the inalienable rights of others. This is love of neighbor, for our right to do anything ends when our desires or actions interfere with the rights of others. Then, in reality, the golden rule takes us even further into exercising our inalienable rights to build on our neighbor's inalienable rights and enhance other people's experience of life. The human genome has natural laws that govern its continuance of existence. They include the right to life, since it is a gift from our Creator. A right to life includes anything and everything that adds value and quality to the individuality of the life of each person in existence. Thus, if any of our life's current and existing beliefs take away others' quality of life, happiness, peace, joy, love, kindness, goodness, or self-control, then it is the law that our right to experience such things must become eroded and diminish. When we fail to uphold the highest law, we will become more alienated from the source of life, God. But then the opposite is true, for as we exercise the golden rule and show love by observing how the laws of the universe will improve our lives once applied, then we will continue to draw in closer and match the vibration of the field of life. This, in fact, is the love of God by definition. For when we learn to harness the natural laws of the universe and show ourselves love first by improving our personal lives, then and only then are we truly empowered to really help others and fulfill the second part of the law and show love for neighbor. Jesus said that we must remove the rafter in our own eye before we can remove the straw in other people's eyes. Once we remove the rafter from our own eye, then we will clearly see how to remove it from others. We will see exactly what is holding them back from achieving success and essentially what is holding us back personally as well. We must realize that most of the time, other people's negative traits are just a reflection of our bigger shortcomings. And when time comes when we clearly accept and take responsibility, we will know how we must acquire skills and use our abilities to wipe the slate of what we believe to be our previously gathered knowledge and unlearn much that we had previously believed to be the truth. As Napoleon Hill suggested, we must start and renew our mind. He said, quote, "We must become self-aware of how and where we acquire our philosophy of life in general, that we may trace our prejudices and our biases to their original sources, that you may discover as I discover how largely you are the result of the training you receive before you reach the age of 15 years. End quote. We can observe that both commandments are in unison. Thus, when we show love for God by exercising our mental capabilities to learn of the laws of the universe and how to aptly apply them in our lives, we will have no choice but to experience personal gratification. When we harness these laws to the service of mankind, as Tesla did, then we will apply the golden rule in its most optimal level, and it will drive us to heights of achievement comparable to Nikola Tesla himself. Exercising foundational law of immortality number 1 will allow us to fulfill foundational law number 2, and vice versa. Refer to Chapter 5 for the best course of action to persevere and put into practice these laws. We suggest that we read and reread this entire book and these concepts, along with the other recommended references, as to enforce or fulfilling the law. These laws of nature, as they are interconnected to our essence, must progressively be ingrained in us and program our entire human genome to affect every aspect of human life. It must start with us as individuals, then as communities, towns, states, countries, and then it must permeate the whole world. The question and obvious statement is, will we really achieve biological eternity by just fulfilling the golden rule? The truth of the matter is that our taking these laws and applying the golden rule in our lives is but one key of an entire set of keys to be able to open up the secret to immortality and youth. The second key to the door to immortality, quote, "The nations of the world will subordinate their individual interests to those of the human race as a whole," end quote, by Napoleon Hill. Quote, "In the final part of the days, the mountain of the house of Jehovah will become firmly established above the top of the mountain, and it will be raised up above the hills, and to it the nations will stream," And many peoples will go and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of Jehovah, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will instruct us about his ways, and we will walk in his paths. He will render judgment among the nations, and set matters straight respecting many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning shears. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, nor will they learn war anymore." End quote. Taken from Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 through 4. As long as it depends upon us as individuals, we must exercise our moral obligation to know that the laws of physics call for the end of violence. We have all heard the famous comment by Jesus that those who live by the sword must die by the sword. Interestingly, it seems that the future promised by Isaiah, he observed a world already in existence where people were eagerly learning the law and principles of the universe, which will ultimately render justice among the nations, where war was no longer an option or even a consideration. This may sound far-fetched to many, but as mentioned before, the systems described in chapters 5 through 8 will help us keep score where we stand in relation to where we should consider wanting to go, for they are founded on the laws of the universe. They are also connected to the foundational laws for immortality, for the trial of knowledge says it is a possibility. Therefore, peace, security, and immortality are in fact a reality. Quote, "By forcing upon the minds of the young of all races the fact that war is horrible and does not serve the interests of the individual engaging in it or the group to which the individual belongs." End quote, by Napoleon Hill. It must be personally and collectively accepted to establish moral law in our hearts, and not just a suggestion, to know that any volunteering of our energies and abilities to the cause of learning war is devoid of any real benefit. What we focus on expands, and its consistent transmission of energy from those who decide to engage will continue to perpetuate that vibration's essence. The person will only reap misery and pain, all fruitage of violence and war. The consistent offering of such energies will be sent into the ether toward its final outcomes. People will be influenced to think, feel, speak, and act out violence. Feelings such as anger, vengeance, rage, and hatred have strong, energetic streams that amp the power of desire. If those desires are pictures of people learning how to combat and wage war against others, then the likelihood of those creations becoming a reality are a certainty. A system which already exists thus must be established firmly to convince not only young ones, but all kinds of people of all races and nationalities to hate war and abstain learning from it. This system of learning is so successful in having convinced in the minds of young and older that individuals who have acquired this knowledge have risked and suffered imprisonment for conscientious refusal to draft in their respective countries' military programs. They are willing to give up nationalistic, dogmatic views of war and willingly sacrifice freedom, time, and energies by exercising their inheritance of natural law to disobey unjust laws, such as obligatory or compulsory military service in the nations of the world. These have truly been their source into plowshares. The people who make such a stand against serving in the military of their respective nations allow for a real positive energy frequency to be transmitted and thus influence a powerful shift that will enforce what we are looking to achieve: establishment of world peace and security. What will happen if the congregations, churches, synagogues, also schools, colleges, and universities made it a prerequisite for membership and admission to vow to never engage in conflict using arms and weapons? There's one organization that is successfully doing just that today. Its members pledge to fulfill many of the quintessential common denominators that must take place before the world experiences world peace and security. Quote, "Any plan to abolish war, to be successful, depends on the successful coordination of effort between all the churches and schools of the world for the avowed purpose of so fertilizing the minds of the young with the idea of abolishing war, that the very word war will strike terror in their hearts. End quote by Napoleon Hill. This organization has successfully implemented the procedures as described through chapters 5 through 8. All of its members must qualify and make pledges to persist and insist on this success system. As we previously discussed, this success system integrates the use of books, audio material, meeting, workshops, and seminars to perpetuate a goal or dream by building a person up. These societies have been progressively integrated around this systematic approach to learning, enforcing the concept of world peace and biological immortality. Its members also continue to build and integrate their relationships solely to those who are like-minded and limit their contact with those who are not in agreement. Thus, they will be more successful in implementing prolonged collective transmissions of frequency that must continue to take place. The recognition for each other and support of each other does not know nationalistic boundaries, and thus their membership has grown and continue to grow throughout the world. All of its members are taught and required, before acceptance, to make a vow to honor these laws and principles and to uphold them. Far from perfect as they exercise their potential, they are consistently implementing honestly and genuinely. Quote, this appeal must be made by organizing and highly emotionalizing the people of the different nations of the world in support of a universal plan for peace. And this plan must be forced upon the minds of the oncoming generations with the same diligent care that we now force upon the minds of our young, the ideal of our respective religions. End quote by Napoleon Hill. The powerful emotion that is permeating this organization is making millions of its members to volunteer incredible amounts of energy and time, even forsaking personal desires and goals temporarily for the bigger picture. They exercise their moral obligation under the golden rule to go to people's homes, talk to people at work or in public areas, to try to disseminate these instructions for others to implement and replicate. Millions of people all over the world are readily accepting this hope as future reality, peace and security under a prosperous new world where anyone will enjoy the exquisite delight in the abundance of peace. It is all a promise supported by universal policy that will bring about the fulfillment that we are now supposed to experience. This is the will of the universe, and we are now seeing this tremendous force perpetuate the minds of the people involved in this movement. Once examined, we may come to realize that we are at the threshold of the fulfillment of this promise. This organization is reflecting what Napoleon Hill knew must happen before we will be able to see this worldwide peace. Quote, if the organized religions of the world, as they now exist, will not subordinate their individual interests and purposes to that of establishing universal peace, then the remedy lies in establishing a universal church of the world that will function through all races and whose creed will be based entirely on the one purpose of implanting in the minds of the young the ideal of worldwide peace. End quote by Napoleon Hill. This society and all of its individual members are focusing their energies and their thoughts, emotions, words, and actions and habits to align with the will of the universe. They have decided and continue to enforce the entire destiny around this concept of universal peace and security, where everyone gives recognition to the universal principles of the Golden Rule and the foundational laws for biological immortality. We previously examined that whatever reality we wish to create in our lives can only become a reality as long as we perceive the laws of the universe, and when applied consistently, they can bring such reality into existence through our matrix of particles defined by time and space. Thus, Napoleon Hill was forced to acknowledge the majority of the people of the world want peace, wherein lies the possibility of its attainment. Millions of members within this organization not only want and desire its final outcome, but have come to the realization of its absolute certainty and future fulfillment. Its energy has continued to collapse progressively for just over 100 years in connection with this promise, where we will see action from the nations of the world, where governmental sovereignties will surrender their preconceived negative notions, both individual citizens and collective national governments, to the fulfillment of this promise. They will have no choice but to comply to the validity of force that these laws of the universe are looking to fulfill collectively. For that which does not match the will of the universe must be removed from existence. If it didn't, then chaos and destruction of the collective consciousness of people will continue to create everything wrong we see today, which will not only ultimately destroy us as a race, but it will permeate the universe. The infinite intelligence that governs the laws of the universe cannot tolerate this gross and willful ignorance. This is why people must awaken their sense of justice and come to the awareness that there is something really wrong with the current matrix reality and its system of things governing our world. Nikola Tesla said, quote, "Let the future tell the truth and evaluate each one according to his work and accomplishment. Present is theirs. The future for which I really worked is mine. I do not regret that others have stolen my ideas rather than why they have in their own." End quote. We must ask the questions with candid self-examination. Have our current lives proved positively the exact representation of the valid truths we have personally acquired? Or would our life prove that we have no idea what we are doing? This must be examined closely, for our lives are the current result of the then created future results of our past truths we have exercised. The laws of nature are telling us that what we are today is only the result of what we have continued to believe and thought about in the past. So if we have readily accepted this truism as individuals, then we must know that this is a fantastic principle for which we can guide our lives. Should we then not consider the big picture of our world and its history and see how miserable we have failed? This present organization that has shown tremendous unprecedented success to achieving some steps in the direction to creating biological immortality have accepted this fact. Therefore, all of its members have surrendered preconceived notions and ideas that did not line up with real principles that work in our life. Leaving behind practices in past lives, they have adopted present real life working principles. They have given up religious dogmas and stubborn bigotry, including lifestyles and attitudes that permeate the negative results of this world. In a harmonious brotherhood, the current membership has agreed on their contract to accept the higher truths. They have progressively fulfilled yet another piece of the puzzle, as Napoleon Hill emphasized, quote, "All denominations must formulate a working agreement under which the combined strength of organized religion will be used as a means of forcing a higher ideal upon the minds of the members." End quote. In addition, it must be emphasized that the agreement must be enforced through highly emotionalized individuals. Women have been known to have high emotional energy and thus can take action and act in harmony more readily than men can. We have all been able to examine that women's nature is to nurture and give of themselves with tremendous ambition and energy. Thus, we know that this is how they experience fulfillment in their lives. Throughout this organization, it has been plainly shown that the membership that complements women under this system have taken the lead to spreading this message all around the world, to nurture people's minds to these universal truths. Yet another parallel from Napoleon Hill that should be accomplished. Quote, "The task of bringing about this alliance of the churches in support of the world of universal peace must rest upon the female members of the church for the reason that the abolition of war promises advantages that may be prolonged into the future and that may accrue only to the unborn generations." End quote. This statement thus fulfills yet another unprecedented requirement that needs to take place as a result of a collective woman force. Emotion is the most powerful force to drive a desire to its completion. Therefore, the female emotion does empower this movement drastically more than anything else that could make it happen. Quote, Jehovah gives the command, the women proclaiming the news are a large army, end quote, taken from Psalm 68 verse 11. Quote, emotion rules the church, and the church is the only organization that rests solely on the power of emotion. The church is the only organized factor of society that has the power to harness and direct the emotional forces of civilization, because the emotions are controlled by faith and not by reason, and the church is the only great organized body in which the fate of the world is centered, end quote, by Napoleon Hill. The third key to the door to immortality, shifting the current matrix paradigm to that of love. Let's regress for a second. Here it is not being suggested that you, the reader, should become part of this organization. Nor was this book written with the purpose to sell you a set of religious dogma. It is not suggested either that you, the reader, should change personal preference if you already have some kind of affiliation to a congregation, denomination, or club. There are too many factors and circumstances that play out in people's lives to give such an opinionated remark. Napoleon Hill's idea, in his chapter on tolerance, was to infuse confidence in a set of action steps that are founded on the laws of physics, the blueprint, if you will, that is certain to propel us into world peace and security. There are common denominators of thought attached to very specifically defined principles and laws of nature taking place in time and space and the planet's collective reality. We must be reminded that the emphasis by Mr. Hill was that people must surrender their will and most basic beliefs to align them to the idea of peace and security. The premise that war is horrible and must be completely done away with is obviously a desire for most of the populace. So realizing what this blueprint calls for is that everyone should at least consider surrendering first the beliefs and dogmas that are not in alignment with the laws of the physical universe for the benefits of the planet as a whole and the biggest minority, the individual. Also, the foundational principles and workings of the concept and word church or congregation should be considered and examined to learn how they can and will potentially accomplish this paradigm. For example, to the large portion of the populace, the word church has an extremely negative connotation, even more so than when Mr. Hill wrote The Law of Success. The word church has been defined as a place where people with a common interest in a deity will come together to worship. These words have become confusing misnomers, and thus their more essential meanings have been obscure. As it stands today, many religious organizations are besmirched due to reports of corruption and moral hypocrisy among its leaders and its constituents. Many of these reports absolutely have strong and clear evidence, and therefore people are turned off by them. Also, people's awareness that many religious organizations will foment and stir up strong emotions and abuse such power for the sole purpose of acquiring exorbitant amounts of money can be appalling and turn many away. Many people are disillusioned with religion in general. But let's consider and break down some of these words to really see what they mean exactly. Let's specifically examine the words religion, church, or congregation, and the word worship. The most basic and foundational meaning for the word religion is a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance. Other definitions have added to it descriptions such as a particular system of faith and worship. We already defined the word faith, but we can see that the first definition of the word church is more accurate in its most basic terms. Let us examine the word religion as a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance. With this, we can say that a person who expresses importance of family closeness and support is a form of religion. We can also say the same that when an individual expresses the importance of integrity and honesty and their exercise must be allowed at all costs, then we can say that the individual is expressing their religion. On the other hand, a person who expresses his will to exercise and engage in habits or hobbies for personal gratification essentially is also expressing their religion. The point is that regardless of a person's opinions of what is important to them, when they are being exercised, in essence, they are expressing their religion. It could be said that I am currently expressing my religion, for I find these principles to be of supreme importance. Thus, this book you are now holding in your hands came to be. Can we say that, in a way, we are expressing our opinions and interpretation of what we consider to be our moral laws? Let's suppose we are in agreement concerning this statement. Then we can consider these personal moral codes and compare them and put them to the test in the light of the most powerful law, the Golden Rule. We must use our discernment and consider every possible outcome based on our moral law to see whether it stands against the foundational laws of immortality, mainly love for neighbor and self. For example, we can say that a person who develops liver cirrhosis due to the overdrinking failed to uphold the second law, or at least love for self. But if the individual has family and children, then should we ask whether the illness will become a burden to them? Will spouses and children have to sacrifice time, energy, and resources to care for a person who may be terminally ill for lack of personal dignity? What about the pain and sorrow they cause to those who will be left behind prematurely? Thus, one religion based on a personal moral code can, in essence, be against the most fundamental laws of the universe. The Golden Rule must be reflected in the light of our religious beliefs, regardless of where they came from. Therefore, it must be our moral obligation to unlearn, as Napoleon Hill did, every preconceived notion of knowledge, belief, cognition, habits, or suggested wisdom that does not pass the test of the Golden Rule. Regardless of where they come from, the laws of nature demand it. Church or congregation. The most basic foundational definitions when examining the words church or congregation denote the idea of a group of people assembled for religious worship. An even more fundamentally defined term for the word congregation is a gathering or collection of people, animals, or things. So we can say that a church or congregation is a collection of people who express their opinions to what is most important for them to pursue, for they ascribe supreme importance to those ideas. Then, if we were to define this even further, we could say that a church is a collective vibration of consciousness vibrating together a set of specific energetic blueprints of frequencies based on its most quintessential imprint. Therefore, we must ask, is the imprint of such frequencies positively based on the most foundational laws of the universe and both foundational laws of immortality? Will these collective vibrations help us as individuals and as a human family to attain what is supposed to be our most basic nature, biological eternity? But let's take this definition a step further by asking the question, what then is worship? Worship, quote, honor given to someone or thing in recognition of their merit, end quote. No matter how we define the word worship, when we break down the most common denominator of its definition, this archaic definition of worship highlighted above will be at the base of all of them. For example, one definition of the word worship is the feelings or expression of reverence and adoration for a deity. Other definitions, the acts of rites that make up a formal expression of reverence for a deity, a religious ceremony or ceremonies. Adoration or devotion comparable to religious homage shown toward a person or principle. The words feeling of expression of reverence, adoration, religious homage, etc. All these definitions carry the idea of showing due honor that is given to someone or something for their own deserved merit. The origin of the word worship denotes the idea of worthiness, acknowledgement, all synonyms of the word merit. The word merit is defined as the quality of being particularly good or worthy of praise or reward. To illustrate, there is a famous quote that says that in life, only two things are certain: death and taxes. We all pay taxes. It is what is due to the government. Whether your local government uses such monies for good or not, that is not the point. But the fact is that the government demands taxes out of its own volition and merit. It is what is due to it. It is a form of recognition, as taxes, by definition, are a form of honor that is given in recognition of merit or credit. Another definition for credit tells us that it is public acknowledgement or praise, typically that is given or received when a person's responsibility for an action or idea becomes apparent. For example, a husband may decide to give his wife a rose and a card as a form of thanks for being a great mother to their children. Certainly, he feels that she should be given proper worship, for he feels like she deserves honor and recognition for being a nurturing mother to their children. Maybe a mother decides to give her daughter proper worship by giving her a shopping spree for excellent academic performance, as the daughter also deserves proper honor and recognition out of her own merit. A different scenario may occur. Let's take taxes again as an example. Regardless of how we may feel about paying our taxes to the government, we are rendering proper worship, for the government must be recognized and given its proper honor for their merit and services rendered. We may all be familiar with the famous remark by Jesus in reference to taxes. Quote, "Pay back, therefore, Caesar's things to Caesar, but God's things to God." End quote. Spiritually minded people may object by saying, "But it is God who deserves the highest form of worship." While that may be true, does such a statement explain what that really means? What does such belief really mean in its most fundamental definition? Can we suggest that God, as the creator of the universe with its most fundamental laws, is deserving of the highest form of recognition by law? Then, like taxes, how can we properly honor him? The question then calls for knowing exactly what type of taxes we are to render to God. If we could ask him personally, how would he respond? The biblical reference points to the love of God as the highest law, for it tells us, quote, "For this is what the love of God means, that we observe his commandments," end quote, taken from 1 John chapter 5, verse 3. So we must ask, what are the most fundamental and highest laws that we should observe so that we may exercise principal love for him and fulfill the first law? I believe we already went over those laws. Let's carefully consider these quantum laws of the universe to access the mind of God. For as Albert Einstein and Nikola Tesla emphasized, we must learn the mind of God and focus our most essential energies to the harnessing of such source of energy. Foundational law of immortality number 1. Quote, "We must love God with your whole heart and with your whole soul and with your whole mind." End quote. Foundational law of immortality number 2. We must love our neighbor as ourselves. So God defines the observance of his highest laws as the highest form of worship or recognition that we can give to him. Therefore, the observation and application of the most quintessential physical laws of the universe in the light of the golden rule as being the highest good for mankind, period. Then we can say that the highest form of worship or honor we can render to God is for us to become a collective vibration of consciousness, vibrating together a set of specific energetic blueprints of frequencies based on its most quintessential and vertex vibrational imprint, love. I don't know how much deeper we can possibly go to define love worship, and true religion, or for that matter, church. For if we become what we think about, then we have the moral obligation to become love. We must learn to align our every thought, emotion, word, action, and habit to the apex of creation, love. This has to be strongly considered at least if we are to succeed in achieving biological immortality, if not true worldwide peace and security. What could be the result of such a paradigm shift on our current matrix of particles of energy defined by time and space? Will we be able to collectively vibrate so high that lower frequency manifestations such as illness and disease will just disappear on their own? Will we transform our energetic blueprints based on our most prevalent thoughts to command every action we take to be that of a loving nature and thus eradicate any possible outcome for war or the slightest form of violence? Will we ever be able to sustain this collective consciousness of vibrational energy long enough to create real physical manifestations and create the desired shift? The answer is no, we won't. At least not on our own. Even as a collective family, the entire human genome. How can we possibly say such a statement after trying to build up credibility and faith on the concept of peace and immortality? This is as if we're saying, just kidding, it is impossible. While it is true that we will be able to achieve a measure of peace through these principles and laws, our nature has been fundamentally corrupted, which must be re-engineered into something new. We mentioned previously that there is an organization that is absolutely applying these principles and is progressively fulfilling the law, but it is far from perfect. Their effort to exercise love and permeate the ether by affecting our current matrix reality is absolutely being integrated into its fabric in time and space. But this will in no way achieve us immortality on its own, but it will, with certainty, push the world to achieve a measure of relative peace and security. This is why the scriptural reference points to a time where people will willingly and eagerly want to learn these laws. Why? The answer takes us to the fourth key to the door to immortality to finally open.